Atlantic City looked beautiful from a distance. That was its first lie. From the highway it glittered like a promise. Towers of mirrored glass rose against the dark sky. Neon signs bled red, gold, and electric blue into the mist rolling in from the Atlantic. The casinos shone like palaces. Music throbbed behind velvet ropes. Chauffeurs opened doors for men in tailored suits and women wrapped in diamonds. But beauty in places like Atlantic City was often just money standing in front of rot. Step one street behind the boardwalk, and the glamour thin. 2 streets behind had vanished. The sidewalks cracked. The walls sweated dampness. The air smelled of salt, cigarettes, old fryer grease, and things no one reported to the police anymore. And on one of those streets, just before midnight, a little boy pedaled through the fog on a bicycle that should have stopped working years ago. Its chain clicked with every turn. Its front wheel wobbled slightly left. The handlebar grip on the right side had long since peeled away, so he held bare metal with small, reddened fingers. His coat was too thin for the weather and too large for his frame. The hood kept slipping back from his dark hair as the wind pushed against him. But he kept going. His name was Noah. He was 8 years old. And in the pocket sewn inside his coat, wrapped in a handkerchief his mother had once used, was the only thing his father had ever left behind. A silver pocket watch. Not expensive, not rare, not beautiful in the way rich people meant beauty. But to Noah it was sacred. It was the last object in the world that had ever belonged to someone who was supposed to have loved him. His mother had pressed it into his hands before she died. "Keep this," she had whispered through fever and pain. "Even if you have nothing else one day, keep this. It means you came from someone. It means you were never an accident." He had slept with it under his pillow every night since. Tonight he was going to sell it. Because at St. Agnes' shelter, where he lived with 19 other children in the shell of a condemned church, 3 of the younger ones were burning with fever. The volunteer nurse had run out of antibiotics. The electricity had been cut off again. The inspector had threatened to shut the place down before winter if their legal paperwork wasn't fixed. And the woman trying to keep all of them alive was one missed payment away from losing everything. That woman's name was Catherine Vale. Most people, if they noticed her at all, thought she was only a waitress. And that was the second lie this city told. Catherine was carrying a tray of 12 whiskey glasses through the VIP mezzanine of the Black Mariner Casino when her phone buzzed for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. She did not check it. You did not stop moving on the VIP floor unless someone richer than you needed something from you. That was one of the unwritten rules of the Black Mariner. The second was simpler. You never made trouble in a room owned by Thomas Verla. The mezzanine overlooked the main gaming floor through smoked glass and brass railings. Everything up there was quiet, expensive, and deliberate. No blinking machines. No tourist noise. No drunk shouting. Just private baccarat tables, velvet booths, men in dark suits, women with expensive boredom in their eyes, and staff trained to move like they were part of the furniture. Catherine moved like that because she had learned to. Invisible. Useful. Forgettable. At 28 she had mastered the art of being underestimated. Her dark blonde hair was always pinned back. Her makeup was minimal because tips came from speed, not beauty, on the floor she worked. Her uniform was black and immaculate. Her expression was neutral. Her posture was straight. She spoke only when necessary. No one there knew she had once ranked first in her university's pre-A program. No one knew she spoke fluent Italian and conversational Russian. No one knew she had left school one semester before graduation after her mother's stroke swallowed every cent the family had. No one knew she now worked double shifts at the casino, then spent her mornings helping Sister Miriam keep St. Agnes' shelter alive through grants, paperwork, emergency care, and whatever legal tricks she could still remember from textbooks she no longer owned. No one knew because Catherine had learned something early. The world was very comfortable with capable women, as long as those women stayed tired enough not to become inconvenient. Her phone buzzed again in the pocket of her apron. She reached the private booth, set down the drinks in front of 4 men laughing too loudly, and only then let herself glance at the screen. Sister Miriam. 3 missed calls. Then a text. Noah took the bicycle. He left half an hour ago. He took the watch. For 1 full second, Catherine stopped breathing. Then she turned and nearly collided with a man carrying a bottle service tray. "Watch it," he snapped. She was already moving. "Cover table 9, she told him, not waiting for agreement. "Catherine." But she was gone. He cut through the service corridor, down the back stairwell, and into the employee break hall before she finally answered. Sister Miriam picked up on the first ring. "Tell me where he went." Her voice came out calmer than she felt. On the other end, the old nun sounded exhausted enough to break. "I only looked away for a few minutes. Leo's fever spiked and I was trying to get the compresses changed. Then, I noticed Noah's blanket was gone, and the bicycle too. And the watch. A silence. Yes. Catherine closed her eyes for one hard second. He heard us talking, Sister Miriam whispered. About the medicine. About the notice from the city. I didn't think. He's 8, Catherine said softly. Of course he heard. In the background she could hear a child crying, another coughing, the rattle of old pipes, the exhausted soundtrack of poverty trying not to become tragedy. I'm going to find him, Catherine said. You're on shift? I'm leaving. You can't afford to lose this job. No, Catherine said, grabbing her coat from the hook beside the lockers, but I can't afford not to find him. She hung up before the older woman could argue. Outside, the Atlantic wind hit like a slap. Fog rolled low across the alleyways, swallowing headlights and neon into blurred halos. Catherine shoved her hands into her coat pockets and moved fast, mind already mapping the places an 8-year-old boy might go if he needed cash in the middle of the night. Pawn shop. He'd go to a pawn shop. And there were only 2 in walking distance willing to do business after 11. She was halfway across Pacific Avenue when she saw the black SUV. Not unusual on the boardwalk. Very unusual in that alley. It idled without hazard lights, polished enough to reflect the street lamps in long dark streaks. 2 men in suits stood near the rear door, not smoking, not talking, just watching. Security. Real security, not casino bouncers. Her pulse tightened. Because in Atlantic City, there were many ways to become powerful. But only one kind of power made armed men stand still in the cold like they were guarding a throne. Catherine slowed. Then she looked up. The private balcony above the alley belonged to the owner's level of the Black Mariner. And behind the glass 1 man stood in silhouette. Still. Watching. Even through the fog and distance, she knew who it was. Thomas Verla. People used different names for him depending on what they needed from him. Casino owner. Investor. Fixer. Philanthropist. Criminal. King. Monster. He had built his empire so carefully that no single newspaper article had ever been able to prove enough to bury him. The police feared him, the city used him, and his enemies disappeared often enough that no one made the mistake of becoming memorable around him. He was 38, controlled half the nightlife on the eastern seaboard, had a face magazines would have called handsome if they were brave enough to print it, and eyes no one ever described the same way twice except to say they were cold. Very cold. Catherine had served him twice in 2 years. Both times he had noticed everything in the room without seeming to move his head. Both times he had thanked her. That had frightened her more than if he'd ignored her. Because men like Thomas Verla did not see women like Catherine unless there was a reason. Tonight he was looking not at her, but past her. Down the alley. Toward the road leading to Brenner and Sons Pawn. Her stomach dropped. Noah. Without thinking, she followed his line of sight. And there, emerging through the fog like a small ghost on 2 crooked wheels, was the boy. Pedaling hard. Head down. Determined. Too small for the city he was moving through. Catherine took 1 step forward. Then another. And above her, from the balcony, Thomas Verla did something almost no one in Atlantic City had ever seen him do. He left before the room told him to. Brenner and Sons Pawn had once been a tailor's shop. The old mirrors still hung behind shelves full of abandoned lives. Wedding bands no longer worn, cameras no one developed film for anymore, tarnished cufflinks, guitar cases, watches, lockets, rings. Half the room smelled like metal and dust, the other half smelled like old grief. Mr. Brenner himself was 70 if he was a day, with a bent spine, thick glasses, and the kind of eyes that had learned to estimate desperation by weight. He looked up when the bell over the door rang. And what he saw made him take off his glasses. Because standing in front of his counter at nearly midnight was a child. Noah stepped up onto the brass footrail to make himself taller. I need to sell something. Mr. Brenner blinked. Where are your parents? I don't have any. Then where's your guardian? At the shelter. At midnight? Yes. The old man leaned back in his chair. What exactly are you trying to sell, kid? Noah carefully reached inside his coat and placed the pocket watch on the glass counter between them. The metal touched with a soft click. Mr. Brenner looked at the watch. Then at the boy. Then back at the watch. He picked it up, turned it over, opened the cover, checked the movement. Not luxury, not antique enough, scratched crystal, worn chain. He knew immediately what it was worth. And he knew immediately it was worth much more than that to the child standing in front of him. How much? Noah asked. Mr. Brenner sighed. Maybe $40. Noah swallowed. Can you do more? Not honestly. The boy's shoulders tightened, but he didn't cry. Please, he said. I need enough for medicine. The old man looked up sharply. What medicine? For the little kids at St. Agnes. They're sick. He said it so plainly that for a moment the room seemed to go quieter around him. Mr. Brenner set the watch down more carefully than before. Whose was it? My father's. Where is he? Noah stared at the glass counter. I don't know. And your mother? A beat. She died. The old man exhaled slowly through his nose. He had been in this business long enough to know when not to ask another question. Still, he tried. Listen to me, son. This isn't enough. Even if I gave you 50, it won't solve whatever. It'll help tonight, Noah said. That answer did something unpleasant to the old man's chest. He glanced toward the window. Fog pressed pale and shapeless against the glass. Then the bell over the door rang again. And the room changed. Some men entered spaces. Other men altered them. Thomas Verla did the second. He stepped inside wearing a charcoal overcoat over a black suit cut with the kind of precision only very expensive tailoring could buy. Rain had darkened one shoulder. His expression was unreadable. Behind him came two men who did not bother pretending they were anything except dangerous. Mr. Brenner went pale. Noah turned around. And at the exact same moment, Catherine burst through the door, breathless from running. Noah. The boy's face changed instantly. Not fear. Relief. Catherine. She crossed the room in 3 fast strides and crouched in front of him, gripping his shoulders. What were you thinking? He opened his mouth. She saw the watch on the counter. And understood. The anger left her face so quickly it hurt. Instead came something worse. A grief so sharp she had to swallow before she could speak. Oh, Noah. I had to, he whispered. Leo couldn't breathe right. Behind her, Mr. Brenner looked between Catherine and Thomas Verla like he was trapped between 2 different storms. Thomas said nothing. He was looking at the watch. Then at the boy. Then at Catherine. And in that instant, with the fog pressing against the windows and the city holding its breath somewhere outside, none of them knew it yet. But this was the night everything would begin. Not with violence. Not with a gunshot. Not with a threat. But with a small moral fracture in a world built on silence. And the first person who would break that silence would be Catherine. For a long moment, no one in the pawn shop moved. Fog outside had thickened until the window looked painted over in white. The old clock above the shelf ticked too loudly. Somewhere in the back room, a pipe knocked once inside the wall. Noah stood with his hands clenched inside the sleeves of his coat. Catherine was still crouched in front of him, one hand on his shoulder, the other braced against the counter like she was holding herself up by force. And behind them, Thomas Verla stood in perfect stillness, his eyes fixed on the silver watch lying under the pawn shop lamp. There are moments in life that feel larger than they should. A dropped glass. A missed phone call. A child standing in a pawn shop after midnight, trying to sell the last thing his dead mother gave him. This was one of those moments. Mr. Brenner cleared his throat first, because old men sometimes survive dangerous rooms by pretending they are still ordinary. I told him 40, he said, voice thinner than he intended. Maybe 50 if I stretch it. Thomas did not look at him. Noah did. That's enough for some medicine, the boy said quickly, as if he feared the adults might somehow take the possibility away if he didn't claim it fast enough. Not all of it, but enough for tonight. Catherine closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, she stood and faced Mr. Brenner. I'll buy it back on Friday, she said. Please just give him the money. Mr. Brenner looked uncomfortable immediately. Miss, if I start doing sentimental exceptions after midnight, I'll have the whole city on my doorstep. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, he snapped, but not cruelly. That's the problem. Catherine's jaw tightened. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her tips from the evening. Crumpled bills. Coins. Nothing close to enough. She flattened them against the counter anyway, as if dignity might make them worth more. Take this, she said. I'll bring the rest in 2 days. Mr. Brenner looked at the money. Then at her. Then at Noah. And before he could answer, Thomas Verla stepped forward. Not abruptly. Not theatrically. Just one measured step. But every molecule in the room seemed to register it. He stopped at the counter, slid a leather wallet from the inside of his coat, and placed a thick stack of bills on the glass beside the watch. No flourish, no announcement, Just money. Enough of it to make the old pawnbroker stare. Enough of it to make Catherine's blood run cold. Noah blinked. Mr. Renner's mouth opened, then closed. Catherine did not look at the money. She looked at Thomas. And unlike almost everyone else in Atlantic City, she did not lower her eyes. That, more than anything, made him pause. His face remained unreadable, but something in his gaze sharpened. I'm not selling him, Catherine said. The sentence landed so strangely in the room that even Noah looked up at her in confusion. Thomas's head tilted almost imperceptibly. No one suggested you were. You put money on the counter in front of a child in the middle of the night, she said evenly. Men like you are never just buying a watch. Mr. Renner nearly stopped breathing. Noah looked between them, sensing danger now but not understanding its shape. One of Thomas's men shifted near the door. Thomas lifted a single finger without taking his eyes off Catherine. The bodyguard went still again. Then Thomas said in a voice so calm it made the old man behind the counter sweat, men like me. Catherine should have backed down. She knew that. Every survival instinct she had built over the last 8 years told her to apologize, to soften, to retreat, to become invisible again before she became memorable in the wrong way. But then she looked at Noah. At the boy who had ridden through winter fog to sell the only thing he had because adults with more power than conscience had made need feel normal. And something inside her hardened into clarity. Yes, she said. Mr. Renner made a faint, strangled sound. Thomas did not blink. The room became so silent that Catherine could hear the slight crackle of the fluorescent bulb over the counter. Finally, Thomas looked down at the watch again. Then, at Noah. Why are you selling it? Noah answered before Catherine could stop him. The little kids at St. Agnes are sick. Thomas's gaze moved back to the boy fully now. What kind of sick? High fevers, coughing, Leo's breathing bad. You have no doctor? Noah shook his head. Volunteer nurse comes sometimes, not every day. And no one else can pay? Noah glanced at Catherine. That one small glance said everything. Thomas followed it. Catherine felt his eyes settle on her like a weight. You're responsible for him? He asked. No, she said. I'm responsible to him. There's a difference. He studied her for a beat. Then, unexpectedly, he asked, What's your name? Catherine. Last name? Vale. Something unreadable passed through his expression at the precision of the answer. Not fear. Not defiance exactly. But discipline. He had seen many kinds of women in his life. Women who performed helplessness. Women who weaponized beauty. Women who bargained. Women who trembled. Women who flattered. Catherine did none of those things. She stood there in a cheap black work uniform and a winter coat that had seen too many seasons, looking at him with the steady eyes of someone who had no illusions left to lose. It interested him more than he liked. He looked back at Noah. Then took the sack of bills and separated a smaller portion from it. He pushed that amount toward Mr. Renner. Pay him for the watch. Then he placed the rest in front of Catherine. For the medicine. She didn't touch it. Take your money back. No. I said no. The faintest shift occurred in the room. Mr. Renner's hand actually trembled against the counter. Noah looked horrified. No one told Thomas Verla no twice in the same minute. Thomas's face remained composed. But when he spoke again, there was a new edge under the calm. Your children need medicine. They do. Then use it. No. Why? Because, I don't know what it buys you. For the first time, Noah tugged at her sleeve. Catherine. She put a hand over his small fist without looking down. Thomas watched that too. Suppose, he said after a pause, it buys me nothing. That would make you the first powerful man in this city to do anything expensive for no reason. One of the bodyguards almost smiled before catching himself. Mr. Renner looked like he might pass out. And then, to everyone's surprise, Thomas did something stranger than anger. He listened. He stood there in the yellow light of a pawn shop in the wrong part of the city, in shoes that probably cost more than the monthly food budget at St. Agnes, and he listened to a waitress tell him the truth. No interruption. No punishment. No demand that she remember who he was. Just stillness. Then Noah, because children often cut through adult stalemates with devastating simplicity, looked up at Thomas and asked, Are you bad? Mr. Renner's glasses nearly slipped off his face. Catherine froze. The bodyguards went statue still. And Thomas. Thomas Verla, feared by judges, politicians, and men who had stabbed other men without remorse, actually looked startled. It was not dramatic. Just a tiny widening of the eyes. But it was real. Noah, seeing no one had stopped him, continued in a small, earnest voice. Because everyone gets scared when you walk in, he said. You also tried to help, so I don't know which one you are. The silence after that felt almost holy. Thomas looked at the boy for a very long time. When he finally answered, his voice was lower than before. I'm not sure, he said. Catherine felt the room tilt. Because men like Thomas did not admit uncertainty. Not publicly. Not ever. Certainly not to children. Noah considered that answer with the grave seriousness only children can bring to impossible things. Then he nodded. As long as you don't make Catherine cry, he said, you can maybe still become good. Mr. Brenner actually turned away and pretended to rearrange a tray of watches because he did not know what else to do with his face. Thomas's mouth shifted barely, briefly, like he had almost remembered what smiling felt like and rejected it at the last second. Then he picked up the pocket watch, turned it over once in his hand, and said to Noah, I'll buy it. Noah's expression changed. He looked down. Then back up. Only if I can know where it is. Thomas's brows lifted a fraction. Why? Because if I ever have enough money, Noah said, I want to buy it back. Something flickered in Thomas's eyes then. Not pity. Something older, more dangerous, more human. Fine, he said. Then he looked at Catherine. The money for the medicine isn't a debt. She folded her arms. That doesn't mean it isn't a chain. His gaze held hers. Then, unexpectedly, he did not argue. Instead he looked at Noah and said, What's the name of your shelter? St. Agnes. And the person running it? Sister Miriam. He nodded once, as if filing away coordinates. Then he placed the money for the watch with Mr. Brenner, slid the medicine money back into his wallet without offense, and tucked the watch carefully into the inner pocket of his coat. Noah watched that motion with painful intensity. Thomas noticed. And for the first time that night, something in his face softened enough to be called gentle. I said you'll know where it is. Noah nodded. That seemed enough for him. Thomas turned to leave. Then paused at the door. Without looking back, he said, Get the child home before the weather worsens. And then he was gone. His men followed. The bell above the door gave one weak ring. And the room exhaled all at once. Mr. Brenner sagged visibly against the counter. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Catherine didn't answer. She was staring at the door. Not because she was impressed. Not because she was relieved. But because every instinct she possessed was telling her the same thing. Men like Thomas Verla did not wander into pawn shops by accident. And they did not ask names unless they intended to remember them. The ride back to St. Agnes was slower. Noah pedaled, Catherine walked beside the bicycle, one hand on the handlebar whenever the road dipped too sharply. The fog had turned denser now, softening the whole city into shapes and shadows. Casino lights bled through it in blurred halos. Sirens sounded somewhere far away. The sea air carried cold into her bones. Noah was quiet for almost 3 blocks. Then he asked, Are you mad at me? Catherine kept her eyes on the road. Yes. He nodded, accepting that. A few more steps. Are you also not mad? That almost got a laugh out of her. Almost. She looked at him then, really looked. At the chapped cheeks, the determined mouth, the exhaustion under his eyes no child should have carried. I'm furious, she said, and I'm proud of you, and I never want you to do something that reckless again for as long as you live. Noah considered that. That's a lot of feelings at once. That's adulthood. He nodded solemnly as if filing that away for future use. Then after a moment, do you think he's bad? Catherine knew exactly who he meant. The answer should have been easy. Men with Thomas Verla's reputation did not earn ambiguity. But the problem with real life, Catherine had learned, was that evil rarely arrived wearing one clear face all the time. Sometimes it bought hospitals. Sometimes it paid for funerals. Sometimes it funded shelters while ruining the neighborhoods around them. Sometimes power did one decent thing and expected the world to call it redemption. So she chose honesty. I think, she said slowly, that some people become so powerful they forget they're still responsible for what they are. Noah frowned slightly. That sounds like a yes. She looked down at him and, despite herself, smiled faintly. It's a lawyer answer. You're not a lawyer. No, she said quietly, Not anymore. Noah was silent after that. Then, in the soft way children sometimes step directly onto hidden bruises, he asked, "Did you want to be one?" Catherine's hand tightened on the bicycle grip. "Yes." He glanced up at her. "Why didn't you?" There were many answers to that question. Because tuition notices are less forgiving than dreams. Because hospitals don't accept ambition as payment. Because her mother's left side had gone numb on a Tuesday, and by Friday Catherine had withdrawn from school without telling anyone. She cried in the registrar's office bathroom after signing the papers. Because invisible women don't get to have expensive futures very often. But Noah was 8. So she only said, "Life changed." He seemed dissatisfied by that, but kind enough not to press. By the time they reached St. Agnes, the church looked as it always did at night, like something faith had abandoned but love had refused to. The roofline sagged. One stained glass window had been replaced by plywood. The front steps leaned. Warm light leaked weakly from 2 downstairs windows. And Sister Miriam was already outside. She had wrapped a shawl over her nightgown and was standing under the broken porch lamp with both hands pressed together so tightly they looked painful. The moment she saw Noah, she descended the steps too fast for her knees and gathered him into her arms. "Oh, child," she whispered, voice shaking. "Oh, child." Noah hugged her back awkwardly with one arm. "I'm okay. That's not the point." "I know." Then Sister Miriam looked up at Catherine. No words passed between them for a moment. Only exhaustion, relief, guilt, shared fear. Finally Catherine said, "How bad?" The older woman's face changed at once. Leo's fever climbed, and Rosa started vomiting. Catherine's body shifted into action before thought could catch up. "How many doses left?" 2 children's bottles of acetaminophen, 1 inhaler, half a strip of amoxicillin that isn't enough for a proper course. Catherine nodded once. "Boil water, keep compresses rotating. I'll check Leo first." She followed Sister Miriam inside without taking off her coat. The shelter smelled like wet wool, old wood, canned soup, and sickness. Mattresses lined the side chapel. 2 sets of bunk beds had been pushed into what used to be the choir room. Children slept in clusters beneath donated blankets. A battery lantern glowed near the old altar because one of the overhead fixtures had died again. Rosa was curled on her side with a basin beside her. Leo, only 5, was breathing too fast on a cot near the radiators that barely worked. Catherine went to him immediately. Back of hand to forehead. Too hot. She counted breaths. Too shallow. She checked his lips. Still pink, thank God. She listened to his chest with the old stethoscope hanging by the medicine shelf, the one with the cracked tubing she had repaired twice already with tape and stubbornness. Wheeze. Congestion. Not good. Behind her, Sister Miriam asked quietly, "Did you find a pharmacy open?" Catherine did not answer right away. Instead she adjusted Leo's blanket, propped him slightly, and said, "Noah tried to pawn his father's watch." Silence. Then, a broken inhale. Sister Miriam covered her mouth with her hand. Catherine stood and turned. "He heard us talking." Tears had already filled the older woman's eyes. "I know. He's 8. I know. He should not be solving adult failures with sacrifice. I know." The nun's voice cracked on the last word. And because both women were too tired for blame to be useful, Catherine crossed the small room and took her by the shoulders. "We'll get through tonight." Sister Miriam nodded once, trying to believe her. Then Catherine asked the practical question, because practical questions were the only kind that kept people alive. "How much is left in the shelter account?" The answer came in a whisper. $217. Catherine closed her eyes briefly. "And the legal notice?" "Still on my desk." "What's the deadline?" 10 days. Her jaw tightened. The city had sent another compliance order that afternoon: repair the building permits, update the guardianship registration, submit medical storage documentation, or face emergency closure. The shelter did not have the money. More importantly, it did not have a lawyer. What it had was Catherine. A waitress with unfinished law training, a library card, insomnia, and a growing hatred for systems designed to punish people for being poor in the wrong neighborhoods. He had been fighting the paperwork for weeks. And losing. Because the forms kept changing. Because the city clerk kept misplacing attachments. Because the zoning office insisted the church was not legally fit for residential occupancy while somehow never saying where 19 children were supposed to go instead. And because every time Catherine got close to fixing one problem, another one appeared wearing a stamp and a deadline. She looked toward the office door at the end of the hall. "Show me the file again." You just worked 11 hours. And now I'm doing my unpaid shift. Sister Miriam actually laughed once through the tears. It sounded tired enough to count as grief. An hour later, Catherine sat at the old desk in the office with the city file spread open under a flickering lamp. Noah had finally fallen asleep on a mattress beside Leo's bed, one hand still curled near the younger boy's blanket as if guarding him even in dreams. The church had gone mostly quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the bare trees with a hollow winter sound. Inside, Catherine read. Violation notice. Structural review. Temporary guardianship deficiencies. Medical compliance deficiency. Pending property seizure due to outstanding debt lien. She stopped there. Read the page again. Then a third time. Her tiredness vanished. What is this? She said aloud. Sister Miriam, half asleep in the chair by the radiator, looked up. What? Catherine held up the lien document. This wasn't in the earlier packet. The older woman frowned and came closer. I only got that copy today. Catherine scanned it again. Her pulse changed. This isn't a city lien. What does that mean? It means someone bundled private debt against the property title. Sister Miriam blinked. I don't understand. It means, Catherine said, eyes narrowing as she read the creditor line again, someone is trying to take this building through a legal back door. The creditor name sat at the bottom of the page like a stain. Mariner Civic Development Holdings. Catherine went still. Very still. Because, she knew that shell company. She had seen it once in a trade article months ago, buried in a boring piece about waterfront redevelopment, a subsidiary with layered ownership structures and board proxies. On paper it was clean. In practice, almost every person in the city knew whose money moved through it. Thomas Verlis, or at least his networks. She read the line again. Then the dates. Then the attached legal filing. And what she felt then was not fear. It was something colder. Understanding. The city wasn't merely neglecting St. Agnes. Someone wanted the land. The shelter sat on a stretch of increasingly valuable redevelopment corridor close enough to future boardwalk expansion to matter. Which meant this wasn't bureaucratic cruelty. This was appetite. And if she was right. If she was very, very right. Then tonight's strange encounter in the pawn shop had not been random mercy. It had been collision. A powerful man had just looked directly at the child whose home his own machine might be crushing. Catherine lowered the paper slowly. The room seemed to tilt around a single unbearable thought. If Thomas Verla knew nothing, then his empire was rotting beneath him. If he did know, then he was worse than she had imagined. Either way, silence was no longer moral. And Catherine Vale, waitress, unpaid caretaker, unfinished lawyer, invisible woman of no consequence in the eyes of the city, had just found the first crack in a system powerful enough to bury her. She looked toward the sleeping children. Toward Noah. Toward Leo's fragile breathing. Toward the old church trying not to die around them. Then she folded the document once. Carefully. Precisely. And said into the dim office, as if making a vow no one else needed to hear. If they want this building, she whispered, they're going to have to say it in front of me. Outside, the fog thickened over Atlantic City. And somewhere high above the boardwalk, in an office of glass and steel, Thomas Verla removed an old silver watch from his coat and stared at the engraving inside. He did not yet know Catherine had found the paper. He did not yet know the woman from the pawn shop was about to walk straight into his world. He did not yet know that the most dangerous thing in his city was not a rival boss, a prosecutor, or a gun. It was a morally exhausted woman with nothing left to lose. And by morning, she would no longer be invisible. By morning, Atlantic City had gone back to pretending. That was one of the city's oldest talents. It could survive almost anything by dressing itself in fresh linen and expensive perfume before noon. Men who had threatened lives at 2 a.m. shook hands over brunch. Women who knew exactly which marriages were built on lies still complimented each other's diamonds. Politicians spoke of civic renewal over imported coffee while blocks of children went hungry less than 2 miles away. And the casinos, those glittering cathedrals of appetite, opened their doors each day as if they had never once swallowed anyone whole. Catherine slept for 90 minutes in a wooden chair beside the office desk at St. Agnes. Then she got up and went to war. Not with weapons. Not yet. With paper. Which, she knew better than most people, could be just as violent. She made coffee so bitter it could have stripped paint. She tied her hair back. She changed out of her waitress uniform and into the closest thing she owned to armor, black slacks, a white blouse with a mended cuff, and a charcoal coat that still held the ghost of winter in its seams. Then she sat back down at the office desk and built a file. Leah notice. Property history. Corporate ownership records. City compliance orders. Late fees. Inspection anomalies. 3 rejected grant applications that had all cited incomplete municipal verification, despite Catherine personally delivering every required form. By 11, she had a pattern. By noon, she had motive. By 1, she had a headache sharp enough to make the light pulse behind her eyes. And by 2, she had something far more dangerous than certainty. She had proof of intent. Not enough to win in court. Not enough yet. But enough to know she was not imagining it. The church property had been quietly positioned for seizure through a chain of shell entities, municipal pressure, and manufactured administrative failure. St. Agnes had been made to look legally unstable on paper until it became vulnerable to redevelopment intervention. A clean phrase for something filthy. She sat back in the chair and stared at the top page. At the company name. At the web of signatures. At the polished legality of theft. Then she looked toward the side chapel, where Noah was helping one of the younger girls tie her shoe as if he were not the same child who had tried to sell his dead mother's last gift 12 hours earlier. Children should not have to survive other people's greed. And yet, the office phone rang. Sister Miriam picked it up from the next room. A pause. Then, Catherine, it's for you. She frowned. For me? No one asks for me by my first name unless they're collecting money or trouble. But she took the receiver anyway. Hello? The voice on the other end was male, low, controlled, and entirely unfamiliar. Miss Vale. Every muscle in her body tightened. Who is this? A car will arrive for you at 6 this evening. Her eyes narrowed. I think you have the wrong number. No. That single word landed with unnerving precision. Then the voice continued. Mr. Verla is hosting a private foundation banquet tonight at the Black Mariner. You and Sister Miriam are expected as guests. Catherine said nothing. The voice added, the invitation extends to one child from St. Agnes, should you choose to bring one. Now she spoke. I don't attend parties thrown by men whose shell companies are trying to take my shelter. Silence. Then after the smallest beat, the man said, bring your file. The line went dead. Catherine stood holding the receiver long after the dial tone began. When she finally lowered it, Sister Miriam was watching her from the office doorway. What happened? Catherine turned slowly. And for the first time that day she smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the kind a person wears when the war finally stops pretending not to know her name. The Black Mariner Casino looked different when you entered through the front. Catherine had spent 2 years moving through its service corridors and employee elevators, learning the bones of the place from the side that smelled like bleach, stale coffee, and overtime. The public face was another species entirely. Crystal chandeliers. Marble polish to a mirror sheen. It ropes. Piano music drifting from somewhere invisible. Women in silk. Men in confidence. A chandeliered lie suspended over a machine built to separate longing from money. At 6 precisely, the car dropped them at the front entrance. Sister Miriam stepped out first in her only formal coat, the navy one with repaired lining and sleeves slightly too short from age. Noah followed in borrowed shoes and a dark sweater that made him look both impossibly small and heartbreakingly serious. Then Catherine emerged last. She had refused to buy anything for the evening, refused to let the city turn her into a decorative gratitude exhibit. She wore a black dress she had owned for years, simple and severe, with no jewelry except her mother's thin silver ring. Invisible, still. If one did not look carefully. But some forms of restraint are more powerful than luxury. The doorman greeted them by name. That unsettled her more than if he'd stared. Inside, every eye that noticed them performed the same tiny calculation. Not one of us. That was fine. Catherine had not come to belong. She had come to understand why Thomas Verla had invited them into his house instead of crushing them quietly like most powerful men would have. Noah's hand slipped into hers as they crossed the lobby. Do I have to talk to rich people? He whispered. She bent slightly toward him. Only if they earn it. He nodded, deeply reassured by this policy. A woman in a fitted black suit approached from the far side of the marble staircase. Not smiling. Not cold either. Efficient. Miss Vale. Sister Miriam. Noah. She inclined her head. I'm Elena. Mr. Verla asked that I escort you personally. Catherine studied her instantly. Early 40s, elegant posture, eyes too observant to be ordinary event staff, wedding band absent, accent faintly northern Italian, no wasted movement. Not a hostess. Something closer to counsel. Escort us where? Catherine asked. To dinner, Elena said, and afterward to a conversation. That order sounds deliberate. It is. Catherine almost respected the honesty. They followed Elena up the main staircase. Noah looked over the railing at the gaming floor below with open fascination, but he did not let go of Catherine's hand. On the second level, they entered the private event wing. The ballroom was already full. Not crowded, curated. This was not one of the casino's vulgar publicity galas. This was a room built for influence. City council members. Developers. Judges. Charity board members. Hospital trustees. Men who wrote checks in public and buried neighborhoods in private. Women whose names appeared on museum walls and campaign donor lists. The kind of people who liked to believe power was cleaner when it wore cufflinks instead of blood. And at the center of all of it, near the far end of the room beneath a ceiling of gold-lit chandeliers, stood Thomas Verla. He was not speaking. He rarely needed to. He stood with one hand in his pocket, listening to a silver-haired banker perform importance in front of him, and yet the room bent around him anyway. Not loudly, not theatrically, but unmistakably. A gravitational field in a tailored suit. His eyes found Catherine almost immediately. No surprise. No visible reaction. Only recognition. Then he excused himself from the banker without apology and crossed the room toward them. Conversation dimmed as he approached. Not because anyone openly stared. Because in rooms like this, people were trained to sense shifts in hierarchy before they understood them. Thomas stopped in front of Noah first. Not Catherine. Not Sister Miriam. Noah. Did you sleep? The boy blinked. Then answered honestly a little. Thomas nodded once as if that mattered. Then his gaze moved to Sister Miriam. You run, St. Agnes. I try. You're failing. Sister Miriam looked stunned. Catherine's expression went flat instantly. And then Thomas finished in the same even tone. Because the city is trying to suffocate you on paper. Now no one said anything. His gaze shifted to Catherine. You brought the file. It was not a question. She held up the folder. Yes. Good. He turned to Elena. Seat them at my table. The nearest councilman nearly choked on his champagne. Catherine saw it. So did Thomas. Neither acknowledged it. Dinner at Thomas Verla's table did not feel like dinner. It felt like entering a chessboard after everyone else had already chosen sides. Noah sat between Catherine and Sister Miriam, posture rigid with the effort of trying not to use the wrong fork. Catherine whispered quiet instructions when needed. Thomas, seated opposite, noticed but did not interfere. To Catherine's right sat a city zoning commissioner whose signature she had seen on 3 contradictory shelter notices. To Thomas's left sat Mayor Adrian Bell, a polished man in his 50s with a campaign smile and the eyes of someone who had long ago outsourced his conscience. And beside the mayor sat Vivian Mercer. Thomas's almost fiancée, if gossip was to be believed. She was exquisite in the manner of expensive things that knew they were being observed. Dark hair pinned in a sculptural wave, emerald silk, diamond earrings like droplets of frozen light. Her smile was flawless and empty in exactly the right social proportions. She looked at Catherine once and filed her under temporary inconvenience. Catherine returned the glance and filed her under danger. The first course arrived. Noah whispered, "Why is the soup in such a tiny bowl?" Catherine leaned toward him. Because rich people like to feel deprived in decorative ways. He nearly laughed into his napkin. Thomas heard. His glass paused halfway to the table. For one impossible flicker of a second, amusement touched his face. Mayor Bell noticed and became suddenly more interested in Noah than he had been all evening. And this, he said warmly, too warmly, must be the brave young man from the shelter. Noah looked at him. Not intimidated. Just assessing. Yes. The mayor smiled broader. We've all heard quite a lot about you. That seems weird, Noah said. 3 nearby guests pretended not to hear. Catherine cut a piece of bread and placed it on his side plate. Thomas drank water and said nothing. Mayor Bell recovered with the smoothness of a career politician. Well, your little act of sacrifice has inspired the city. No, it didn't, Noah said. Now the table really went quiet. The mayor blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Noah looked confused by the confusion. "I sold the watch because Leo was sick," he said. "That's not inspiring. That's just because no one else fixed it in time." Catherine nearly closed her eyes. Sister Miriam looked like she wanted to vanish. Vivian Mercer took a delicate sip of wine to hide a smile that was not kind. And Thomas simply watched the boy. As if Noah's refusal to perform gratitude interested him more than all the polished speeches in the room combined. Mayor Bell laughed too loudly. Children do have a way of simplifying things. "Yes," Catherine said, "sometimes accurately." Now the mayor looked at her. And because he was a man who measured rooms quickly, he decided at once that she was the greater problem. He smiled. "And you are?" "Catherine Vale." "Ah, the waitress." The word landed exactly as intended. Small. Classed. Contained. It was the sort of social cut powerful men used when they wanted to remind a woman she had entered the wrong altitude. Catherine dabbed her mouth with her napkin and met his eyes. "Yes," she said, "and the person who noticed your zoning office attached 2 contradictory compliance standards to a non-profit occupancy file in the same quarter, which is either administrative incompetence or intentional pressure. I haven't decided which reflects worse on you yet." Noah stopped chewing. Sister Miriam went perfectly still. Vivian's eyebrows lifted. The zoning commissioner across from Catherine suddenly became fascinated by his bread plate. And Thomas. Thomas did not interrupt. He did not redirect. He did not rescue the mayor from the woman he had just underestimated. He simply watched. Listened. And believed her before she had shown a single page. Mayor Bell's smile held for 2 full seconds. Then thinned. "I'm sure whatever concerns you have can be handled through the proper channels." "They were," Catherine said, repeatedly. "That appears to be the problem." Thomas set down his water glass with deliberate softness. "Miss Vale," he said. The whole table looked at him. He held Catherine's gaze. "After dinner," he said, "you'll show me every document." The zoning commissioner inhaled, sharply. "Mayor Bell," said Thomas, "surely this isn't the venue." "It became the venue," Thomas said without looking at him, "when your office decided to pressure a church shelter housing children." No one at the table moved. The room had not gone fully silent. The silence at this table had begun to spread. Like ink in water. And then the second course arrived. And with it, the beginning of blood. There are moments before disaster that only become visible in hindsight. A hand trembling just slightly too much. A waiter avoiding eye contact. A glass placed half an inch too close to the wrong setting. Catherine noticed because she had spent years surviving by noticing things no one thought she had the right to see. The server approaching Thomas's place setting was new. She knew almost all the regular private floor service staff by face. This man she had never seen. Too old to be newly hired bank at help, too tense to be experienced. His cuff sat wrong against the tray wrist. His eyes flicked once not to Thomas but to Vivian Mercer. Just once. Enough. The wine was poured. Thomas's hand moved toward the glass. And Catherine said very clearly, "Don't drink that." The sentence sliced through the table. Thomas stopped instantly. No hesitation. No irritated demand for explanation. No masculine ego performance. He simply paused. And believed her. The server froze. Every person at the table turned toward Catherine. Mayor Bell frowned. Vivian's expression did not change quickly enough to hide the flash beneath it. Catherine was already standing. "What did you just say?" the mayor asked. Catherine did not answer him. Her eyes stayed on the glass. Then on the server. Then on Vivian. "Don't," she said to Thomas again, quieter this time, "touch that glass." Thomas leaned back in his chair. Not alarmed. Alert. "Why?" "Because if I'm wrong," Catherine said, "you lose 1 drink." She looked directly at the server. "If I'm right, someone here just tried to kill you." The room around them went still in waves. Nearby conversations faltered. Chairs stopped moving. Forks lowered. The server's face changed first. Only a little. But enough. Thomas saw it. And when Thomas Verla truly looked at someone, men with cleaner consciences had collapsed under less. The server took 1 step backward. Thomas didn't raise his voice. "Take him." 2 security men appeared so quickly it was obvious they had never been far away. The server panicked. Not the controlled denial of innocence. Panic. He dropped the tray. Silver clattered across the marble like gunfire. Women gasped. Someone stood too fast. A glass shattered. The man lunged sideways. He almost made it 3 steps before security slammed him to the floor. The ballroom erupted. Not into screaming. Into expensive chaos. Which is somehow uglier. Thomas never took his eyes off the wine glass. Catherine moved around the table and stopped beside it. "Don't let anyone touch the stem," she said. One of the security men looked to Thomas. Thomas said, "Do exactly what she says." No one at the table seemed to understand what had just happened except Catherine. And Vivian, who was now very carefully controlling her breathing. Mayor Bell stood. "This is absurd." Catherine turned to him. "Then drink it." He went white. That was when the room truly fell silent. Thomas looked up at her. "Why did you notice?" Catherine didn't look away. The pour was wrong. He approached from the incorrect side for the server's format. He kept his thumb too high on the bottleneck to conceal the label seam, and he checked MS. Mercer's face before he reached your place setting. Every word landed like a dropped knife. Vivian said sharply, "That is an outrageous accusation." Catherine turned to her. "No," she said. "It's an observation." Vivian's expression sharpened into open hostility for the first time. "You're a waitress, not an investigator." Catherine's face remained composed. "No," she said, "but I know how service works, better than you do." Thomas's gaze shifted from Catherine to Vivian. And did not move. Not because he was convinced. Not fully. But because something much more dangerous had happened. Doubt had entered the room. And once doubt enters a power structure, it rarely leaves without taking someone down. Security hauled the struggling server to his knees. He looked terrified now. Not loyal, not hardened. Terrified. Thomas spoke without raising his voice. "Who sent you?" The man said nothing. Thomas nodded once. One of his security men stepped forward. Catherine said sharply, "Wait." Everyone turned to her again. Even now, in a room vibrating with threat, she stepped into the center of the danger because silence would be immoral. "Don't hit him." Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" "Because if he was paid to deliver, and not to know the chemistry, bruising him won't tell you anything faster than fear already will." The room seemed to register her all over again. Not as a waitress. Not as Noah's caretaker. Not as an accidental guest. As something else. Something inconveniently competent. Thomas looked at the trembling server. Then back at Catherine. Then said in front of the mayor, the commissioner, the donors, the socialites, and the entire upper layer of Atlantic City's polished corruption. "Proceed, Miss Vale." That was the moment the power shifted. Not loudly. Not with applause. With authority. Borrowed publicly from a feared man and placed, unmistakably, into the hands of a woman no one in that room had thought important 15 minutes earlier. Catherine stepped closer to the server and crouched just enough to bring her eyes level with his. He was sweating through his collar. "Listen carefully," she said. "If that glass tests clean, you're finished anyway because you panicked in the wrong room. But if it tests positive and you cooperate now, there's a difference between attempted murder and conspiracy participation with immediate confession. One gives people room to bargain for your life, the other doesn't." The man stared at her. Breathing hard. Catherine lowered her voice. "Who told you where to stand?" His eyes flicked. Not to Thomas. Not to security. To Vivian. Just once. It was enough. Vivian rose from her chair in outrage. "How dare you?" And then Thomas spoke her name. Just once. "Sit." She stopped. Not because he shouted. Because he didn't. That was always worse. Vivian looked at him, and for the first time all evening something like real fear crossed her face. She sat. The server broke. "I didn't know what it was," he blurted. "I swear to God, I didn't know. They just said switch the marked glass before dessert service. I never touched the bottle myself, I only switched the place setting. I didn't know." "Who said?" Catherine asked. His voice cracked. "A woman from upstairs. Event staff office. She said it came from a mess." Mercer sighed.